really excited for this next panel. We've had a little change to the schedule. We are all about going with the flow during Climate Week. But I'm so excited to invite my favorite food power couple on stage. So let me sit down and have them come up. I'd like Kathleen Finlay, the president of the Glynwood Center for Regional Food and Farming, to join me. Give her a round of applause. And the amazing Mark Bittman, the founder of the Bittman Project and Community Kitchen. He's also a best-selling author, in case you didn't know. I don't know if you remember him. And a former New York Times columnist. Thank you both so much for being here. Give them a round of applause, please. Kathleen, my friend, I'd love to start with you. I'm hoping you can talk about why regional food systems are so important. We heard a lot. I mean, people who'd never heard of regional food systems heard a lot about them during 2020 until now. Why are they so important to resiliency and to helping solve the climate crisis?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Danny. Thanks for having us here. You're doing a great job, as usual.
Thank you.
Yeah, our organization is really out to prove that regional is the appropriate scale for agriculture, in stark contrast to the centralized commodity big ag system. And you heard a lot of the reasons why that's important on this morning in the talks we've been having. So you can't have food sovereignty. You can't have people have agency over food with their food system at a centralized large scale. So lots of social reasons to have a regional food system, but also all the reasons that we've also heard about in terms of stewarding land well, having community, having farmers farm land with dignity, getting that dignity into the neighborhoods where they are. So I think, a whole variety of reasons. And what I hear a lot in response to what we're out to prove, you can make a regional food system that's not only possible, but it's critical in order to steward our land and our human health and our communities well. And I get some skepticism about the possibility of doing that at scale. And I just think that that's crap.
Isn't it bullshit?
It's total bullshit.
Didn't we used to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
And not that long ago,
yes.
right? Talk a little bit about that, of the history of how our food system shifted from that to the crappy place we are now.
I think when people ask me, can we feed the world with regional food system, what they're really asking is, can we continue to make a couple of people rich if we transition to regional food system? I don't think they're asking a question about actually how we feed folks. I think they're asking a question about capitalism and commodities and markets. Yeah. And thank you.
Do it.
And so if we want to imagine a system that is going to feed and steward our health well and steward our land, and where community members have agency, have a place, have a voice in our food system, we have to re-regionalize it.
Yeah, Mark, if I can turn to you. I mean, you've been looking at the food and agriculture systems in this country and around the world for so long. How have you seen the conversation change over the last 10 years? We talked a little bit about the pandemic and how regional has become more a part of the vernacular. What else is changing?
Well, can I say that I'm really gratified that the climate movement has finally realized that agriculture is as important a part of this issue as anything else, and that this should be called Food and Climate Week.
Yeah.
So that's a change that's happening. I can remember when it started to happen, probably 7 or 8 years ago, but it's accelerated quickly, and I think that's a really big deal. The conversation around food, Kathleen basically just said this, but the conversation of food really does need to shift away from, can we make industrial agriculture even more efficient, to how do we move to something that works to serve people rather than corporations. And there's a lot of talking and a lot of dickering that needs to be done around that. But the first thing is to sort of shift that conversation. I mean, especially at the UN, but elsewhere, certainly when you're talking to global leaders and when you're talking to corporate leaders and when you're in rooms like the rooms that are happening all over the city this week, you hear a lot of talk about technology and innovation and and you don't hear nearly enough talk about traditional wisdom, about food sovereignty, about, So, I mean, the question is, what are the achievable goals that we can do short term that demonstrate that there are models that show another way of doing things can work, and they're not going to work to feed the world. They're going to work because you're going to see communities where there are increasing numbers of farmers, there are new people coming onto the land, those farms are supplying their neighborhoods and their communities, there starts to become sort of a cyclical local economy. Those we can model what we think things ought to look like 50 years from now, and we can talk about how to get from here to there. But we can't say, well, next week we need to do this, because that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I like that the conversation is shifting from less, how do we make agriculture less bad? How do we make food systems less bad? To, these regenerative, resilient, regional food systems that have, show us that they have worked, and that we rely on traditional knowledge and community-based agriculture. But I don't, you say that things can happen next week, and I get that, but the urgency is so great. So I wonder from both of you, how do we, and I talked a lot about this last year, this idea of hopeful urgency. Like, we know what we need to do, but we're not doing it quick enough, and the world is on fire. So how do we accelerate things so that it doesn't have to happen next week, but it does have to happen?
I mean, I think the philanthropic sector has a huge role to play. Policy is slow moving, and just as Mark said, we need these examples of how to do food right. We need them now, and to make that kind of innovative change or that paradigm shift, we can't rely on federal dollars. We really need to raise money from the private sector. And so, I feel that philanthropy is in understanding the important role that food is playing in the climate crisis and how we need to get it right, and is betting on nonprofits like we've heard from this morning, on programs that are helping to get food access more predominantly available in many neighborhoods. All of those efforts take investments, and I'm pleased that the investments seem to be coming from the Philanthropic Center, but we need a lot more of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Philanthropy is changing, just, again, not for me quick enough.
Yeah.
Mark?
When I said things couldn't happen next week, I meant the big things couldn't happen next week. There are a ton of things that could be happening now, and I don't think I'm disagreeing with you. But
you can.
I know I can, but I think you'd agree with this. So it's just a sort of different way of putting things. We should still work on making industrial agriculture less bad. So to the extent that we can, let's say, subsidize farmers or encourage farmers to use integrated pest management and fewer pesticides on their farms, that would be an immediately good thing.
Yeah.
And of course, to the extent that we can prohibit or limit the use of antibiotics in industrial production of animals, that would be a good thing. Doesn't mean we don't want to end the industrial production of animals, but in the meantime, we can make it safer. And a third example would be to subsidize farmers, to encourage farmers to produce better food rather than simply to produce more of the same corn and soybeans. So these ways of sort of like not that challenging changes in industrial agriculture that could make a difference while we're figuring out how to do things much better are meaningful. Yeah.
This idea of a just transition, which I love, it requires, investing in farmers, investing in the land. But given, and I was going to get into this later, given our current political situation, is that possible even? From both of you.
I mean, depending on what happens. But, right now, I'll just talk very transparently about what we're seeing as we're, relatively small nonprofit building a regional food system in New York. dedicated to food access and food equity and training next generation farmers in regenerative agriculture. And right this year, I would say the past 18 months is the most dollars that we've received from the US government for the work that we do. So I'm seeing that there are incentives that are coming from this administration, at least, that are really going directly into the hands of farmers, the kinds of farmers that we work with.
Right.
For example, we were talking about at an earlier panel this using SNAP dollars to purchase a CSA subscription. So we had a grant a while ago. They took a little hiatus, but they're back now. So with federal funding, we're going to get into almost 1,000 households that are able to use their SNAP dollars, point on sale, to purchase a CSA at 50% off. So those incentives, the Climate Smart Commodities Act is helping us transition farmers in the Hudson Valley to have more regenerative practices, and created a fund for those farmers to tap into so that when they do have to adopt those practices, if there are costs associated with it, there's a fund that they can dip into. So I'm seeing some progress. I've been in this role for about 12 years, so most dollars I've ever had. And so, yeah, I'm a little scared about what's down the pike.
Sure.
And there's a lot on the line.
What does your model, the Glynwood model, which is so awesome, what does it need to succeed? What does it need to do better? Like, what if you had your dream from the next administration, what would you need to make it even better than it is today?
I think more federal dollars coming into organizations like Glynwood, like from the organizations that we heard about, that are actually resourcing farmers, especially marginalized farmers, and that are doing farming right, and those programs that help make sure that that food is made accessible to everyone, not just wealthy people who can afford to pay for it.
Absolutely. One of the reasons I love this couple so much is they are both so creative. And so, Mark, I want to give you a chance to talk about the cool project that you've been working on, Community Kitchen, and why you think it can be transformative.
Can I just follow up on one thing here? I mean, not that I should pass up an opportunity to talk about Community Kitchen, but we have 14 minutes left. So, we're at the beginning of a period where things could go very well or very badly. I think everyone in this room is aware of that. But let's pretend for a minute that they're going to go well. There hasn't been a period of real stability under a sort of, to use a hackneyed word, progressive government in a long time in this country. But if we had 5, 10, 15 years of consistent government that was looking at programs and evaluating them and funding things that made sense and not trying to tear things down or being forced to rebuild the stuff that the previous administration tore down, or be on the defensive around things like SNAP or abortion, but could just work on making things better, I think we would really see that things can get better quickly, that there's opportunity to make things better, that there are programs in place that are already working on that just need to be attended to and funded properly, and so on, that there are agencies that can be strengthened and rationalized, like USDA and FDA and EPA and so on. And that's just the opportunity that we have now. I mean, the difference between a Democratic president and Congress and Donald Trump in 6 weeks from now or whatever is the difference between everything we're talking about thriving over the next period of time and everything we're talking about being under attack.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Please clap. In the absence of the model that you just described, do you feel like municipal governments, cities, towns, villages can fill in that sort of what you're describing? Have their own food and farm bills, have their own, things that really maybe trickle up at some point?
Sure, but it's playing defense.
Yeah.
And it's time for us to build. It's not time for us to it's not time for us to build firewalls or seawalls or whatever you want to call them. It's time for us to build programs that actually work and help people. And you can see that some of that has happened during the Biden administration, but imagine that with a democratically controlled Congress, and imagine that without a 4-year interruption by some maniac who's going to try to tear everything down, and then we have to start again.
Yeah.
Okay, enough. I'm sure everybody.
Talk about Community Kitchen for me for a minute.
I'm sure everybody here is sympathetic to that. And now for something completely different. So Community Kitchen, we did talk about it on this stage in a different location last year. And since then, we have built an awesome team. I have to start. I'm sorry. Community Kitchen is my idea to form a restaurant that does everything right. I'll back up even a little bit further. I was a cook and a cookbook writer and a writer about food, and still am, but was doing exclusively that for many, many years. And I really believed that the way to make a lot of change was to get people to cook. And of course, that is a way to make change, is to get people to cook. But there's got to be a recognition that not everybody is going to cook. Not everybody wants to cook. Not everybody can cook. Not everybody can afford ingredients. Not everybody even has a kitchen. So, and increasingly, the culture is changing so that people think that it's normal to not eat at home. And I don't know that that culture is going to change back. We need public eateries that serve us. There's something to be learned from almost every restaurant you look at, but mostly what there is to be learned is how things could be done better. So what's the way that a restaurant could do everything right? Well, it could source from the kind of farmers that Kathleen's been talking about. It could pay workers dignified living wages, workers up and down the food chain. I'm sure someone has already said here this morning that 7 of the 10 worst paying jobs in the United States are food related. It doesn't have to be that way. I had a, later for that. I'm distracting myself. So we can source great food, we can pay workers what they should be paid, we can make great, healthy, appropriate food, and we can serve it on a sliding scale. That's a nonprofit venture because that sliding scale is it's not a buzz killer, it's a great thing, but it makes it a nonprofit. I started working on this 3 or 4 years ago. Last year we built a pretty powerful team, and we are now, I'm just going to be as quick as I possibly can. We're working on these 4 things. 1, raising money. Every nonprofit person will tell you that. 2, we are building alliances around the city. This is going to be a New York-based city thing at first. We are building alliances around the city. We're also building alliances around the country and around the world. But we are building alliances in neighborhoods in the city and trying to figure out where we are most appropriately sited for our first operation. The third thing we're doing is trying to understand sliding scale better than anyone has ever understood it, which, believe me, there has not been a huge research project funded with millions of dollars to figure out sliding scale, because you don't make money on sliding scale. And then the fourth thing is we're going to do a pop-up in the winter or early spring. So that's what we're working on now, and we hope to have an actual physical presence less than 6 months from now.
And just very quickly, it's clear that over the last several years, the restaurant industry is changing. Do you expect allies from, JBF and others who are, in the traditional sort of restaurant business?
I mean, increasingly, I think the short answer is yes. There will be conflicts, of course, but I think everybody has to acknowledge that we need public eateries.
Yeah.
So where the profit motive comes in, where the nonprofits come in, that's something to be decided down the road. Community Kitchen intends to be, and I think it's viable and I think it's needed, a model that says, here's a way that you could do this as well as possible. And people are doing it. This is what we're calling a public restaurant movement around the world. Mexico, Brazil, the UK, Poland, Japan. This stuff is happening elsewhere, and it's going to keep happening everywhere. And it's a model for what the restaurant of the future ought to look like. It doesn't mean people can't make a living by owning restaurants. It does mean that workers need to make a living, farmers need to make a living, eaters need to eat well. Those things need to be taken into account.
Absolutely.
They're not in most restaurants.
Absolutely.
Now.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. I'm excited to see how it progresses.
Me too.
Kathleen, if I can turn to you. and I just have to say this bluntly, and I'm sorry, Mark, but for too long, older white men have been at the center of these conversations. And I think what you have done, and maybe to some extent what I have tried to do, is bring different voices, especially the voices of women and others, into these conversations. And I wonder, why is that so important? Why do we need more diversity of voices? And how do we continue that? How do we continue to bring youth and folks of color and others into these conversations when they are so often left out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I at the start of my career was frustrated that the women and women plus folks that I knew who were really passionate about a range of environmental issues didn't see women in leadership positions at most of the NGOs. So it's predominantly white guys, and just started to worry that we're leaving half the talent and skills and ingenuity and creativity off the table. Like, we need all hands on deck. And so these, structural, cultural and social forces that have kept that talent, that creativity, that ingenuity from solving some of the world's hardest problems, we need to deal with that in order to solve the problem. So, I just started gathering folks, women and non-binary folks that are interested in having more say, more agency in how to address these problems, how to find the solutions, and more creativity in how to get there. So I'm really dedicated to doing that in the environmental space writ large. This is Dandelion Project. If you don't know about it, look it up. It's aimed to highlight the important role women play in the climate crisis, both as solution providers, but also how we're affected globally. And a range of organizations that are focusing on gender equity in this space. And what I want to say is that if you look at environmental NGOs, that it's still dominated. The large-scale NGOs are still dominated by white men. But the exception is in food and farming NGOs. And so that's where women have really been taking on leadership, and that's being modeled and replicated and is really meaningful for the future of this country.
And that's thanks to people like you. So thank you for that work. Give her a round of applause. She's amazing. In the few minutes we have left, I have two more questions, but Mark and I have been emailing about this. I wonder if you're both surprised about how some of the big greens who got into food maybe pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, and by big greens, I mean the big environmental organizations, are now saying, oh gosh, I don't want to work on food anymore. Mark?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
We were talking about a particular organization that I won't name. That is let me just write it down for you. Is letting some of its food staff go, its food and ag staff go, and how disappointed we both were by that, and that we're seeing a pattern.
I mean, food is tough. I don't know why that decision was made. And, it's sort of like we're talking inside baseball where we're not even saying what we're saying. So I don't.
Sorry, I can't say it.
There's more people working on food now than there ever have been before. And there's so much energy for this stuff.
Yeah.
I teach really young people, and they are, or young adults, and they are so into this stuff. And so I think this is the best thing I could say. I teach this class called Food, Public Health, and Social Justice. When I named that class 9 years ago, that was like a radical notion to put those three things in the same sentence. Now the students walk in, and they know everything I'm going to say before I say it.
That's cool.
That stuff, the fact that food is the lens that can help you address climate, for sure, but social justice, the environment in general, the economy, land, environmental justice, racial justice, gender justice, all of that stuff you can address through food. There are other things that you can address those issues through also, for sure. But food is really one of the key core issues of our time, and more people are recognizing it. Listen, last year, I mean, you've always been really great to me, and I appreciate that. But 2 years ago, I had nothing to do with Climate Week. Last year, there were a couple things. This year, it's like overwhelming, and it's because the climate people want people who can talk about food.
Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I guess I hadn't thought about it too much, but I wonder if it's a bad thing. Just as our work is really about having communities have agency in their food system, the efforts that are proving successful, some of whom we heard from today, are quite regional, smaller in scale, innovative, working within communities. So if the big guys don't want to do food, maybe that translates into more, philanthropic dollars, more energy, more support coming into decentralized efforts that are all hopefully working together, sharing their successes, their challenges, what they got right, what they got wrong, and replicating. Our models are boots on the ground here in New York, but we're talking nationally and internationally about the programs that we're doing that are working and what didn't work, so that other folks can take that and build on it and modify it to their own special circumstances. So I think if the big green organizations feel like, they don't need to address food, if that support can then translate into a more grassroots, community-based level of innovation and sharing with the sharing, hurrah.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I love that kind of description of it. It makes me feel better. Final, you each get 30 seconds. I'm putting more time on the clock. I need one more minute. 30 seconds for a call to action to this audience. So Kathleen, go first.
Mine's really easy. Find your regional farmer. If you haven't already, find your local farmer. Join a CSA. If you're in New York, we have a website that can help you find your CSA. If you just go to glynwood.org, you can just support your local farmer. That's it.
Thank you. Mark, you get the final word.
I think, first of all, I think it's vote and work to get out the vote to the extent that you can. Second, I think the thing I just said, that food is the lens through which we can view everything else. No matter what you're working on, you can tie it to food. And it's just about justice. It's all about justice. So if you're working on the environment, if you're working on food, if you're working on gender issues, if you're working on, just tie it together and do that.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. Please give them a round of applause. Wonderful to see you both. Thank you. Thank you.